Conservative and Reform and non-Orthodox Jews are Zionists, full stop. My second of this July Israel sermon series is about the need and how we can forge continued religious pluralism in the state of Israel. Only this week in my research did I learn that a conservative rabbi helped shape Israel's Declaration of Independence in 1948. Israel became a state on May 14th, 1948, just 3 weeks after Passover, which is why Yom HaAtzmaut is 3 weeks after Passover every year. And at that Seder that year, a young lawyer in Tel Aviv named Mordechai Behem was at his parents' Seder, and he broke down in tears. And his parents were wondering what's wrong with their young adult son. And he explained to him that he had been tasked with writing the first draft of Israel's Declaration of Independence in anticipation of that May 14th date. And he didn't know how to begin. He felt the burden of people like Thomas Jefferson, who wrote, obviously, the American Declaration. And he's like, I'm no Thomas Jefferson. How am I going to begin? Well, apparently the Behem family had a neighbor, Rabbi Harry, who then changed his name to Shalom Tzvi Davidowitz. He was ordained in 1913 and made Aliyah in 1934. He was no longer a pulpit rabbi. He actually was the one who translated all of Shakespeare's plays into Hebrew. But once a rabbi, always a rabbi. And so his parents suggested to Mordechai, why don't you go after the holiday is over to see Rabbi Davidowitz? And so he did. And Rabbi Davidowitz calmed him down and told him to bring out his notebook and to start to pen some ideas of how Israel could declare its independence. The family has actually since donated those notebooks to Israel in 2008. You can see pictures of the chicken scratch. It's hard to sort of read. It's actually some of it in English, some of it in Hebrew. Not the words that he wrote down, but the structure that Behem and really with Davidowitz created of this, talking about Israel's history and connection to the land, and then sort of forging Israel's brand new state. That structure remained into the final draft. And even Rabbi Davidowitz's compromise term for God as Tzor Yisrael, the rock of Israel, maintained itself into the final draft. I, as a conservative rabbi and as a conservative non-Orthodox Jew, have a lot of pride to learn this fact. But we also know that for the conservative movement especially, this is just icing on the cake. Both Reform and conservative movements have been staunchly Zionist since the very beginning. We can read and people reminisce about trips they took in the 50s and 60s and on and beyond, and the advocacy that non-Orthodox Jews have made for Israel in 67 with the euphoria, and yes, with the disaster and pain of 1973, and only with sort of the pushing of American Jews was Israel able to come out on top. We also know that what we could call religious sectarianism, or sort of breaking into movements, is rooted in conflict, or at least differentiation and sort of a difference of ideas, because the conservative movement formed out of a response to the Reform movement saying in 1883, don't keep kosher. The Haredi, who I'll be talking about a little bit later, formed in the 1800s really as a fear, a response that the non-Orthodox were going too far to secularism in their mind. And so they became a reactionary movement, sort of trying to react to that fear of what's going to happen to Torah Judaism in their minds. And yet, we know that Jews need to be united. United if we're going to have a state, and united if we're going to fight anti-Semitism, because we really are a tiny minority in the global population. So how do we handle really staunch differences and also remain united at the same time? Not an easy feat to do, especially when it comes for the non-Orthodox that were kind of behind the 8 ball already. Because if you know your history, David Ben-Gurion gave the Haredim quite a bit of power in 1948 with the so-called status quo compromise, and let the Orthodox hold on to the status power of marriages and all things religious in the state of Israel. Why? Because he didn't feel, not quite, I don't want to say threatened, but didn't feel that he had to counter the philosophy of the Orthodox, because he thought they would not survive that generation. He really believed, as a secular European Jew, that his culture, his secular Jewish culture, was going to be the one to overtake the religious nature of Judaism. He was wrong. And he saw that both Orthodox and I'll say even non-Orthodox Jews saw that there was a role of traditional Jewish practice even in this new state, even with all of the culture. So let's jump to today. Of course, you can continue to read all the different history. And we see that that sort of power struggle is still there. And it's a political struggle as well. We Americans are trained, and I still staunchly believe it here in America, to separate our religion and our politics. But in Israel, the dream of Israel as a Jewish state, politics and religion are necessarily mixed. And so when it comes to finding pluralism, you actually have to engage in politics. Politics is often, you hear the word, facts on the ground. So I am inspired by now member of Knesset, Rabbi Gilad Kariv, who led the reform movement in Israel for 14 years. He was born in Tel Aviv. He is a true Sabra. His family was not very observant, but yet he discovered in the Israeli reform movement a true calling, a calling to connect and to use tradition in a new way, albeit, to live in the state, his homeland, the state of Israel. When he took over as the head of the movement, he put up a map in his office of all the places that there were Reform synagogues. And he saw that the map was kind of empty. There only were about 50 various different organizations and synagogues. And in the matter of years, he doubled that to over 100 different Reform synagogues. And the Masorti movement in Israel can say the same. I don't have the exact numbers, but it's about putting facts on the ground, putting synagogues, having people discover, having people not from Israel, native Israelis, become rabbis and really sort of see the power in non-Orthodox Judaism. Once there's facts on the ground, it's harder for other groups to come and take away those facts. But we also have to know it's not a zero-sum game. The Haredi are here to stay. They are Jewish, whether we want to argue whether they are too reactionary or not. If we're going to really believe in freedom of religion and for people like us to interpret the Torah, then they need to be free to do so as well. And we have to have that sacred struggle, not a battle of insults or God forbid, worse. We need to have that sacred struggle of saying that we're going to have machlakot l'shem shamayim, disputes for the sake of heaven. And everyone is going to have to compromise some. We're going to have to allow, at least privately or sort of, on special basis and ways, for the gender separation that the Haredi so much want. If you need to create an office where the Haredi men work in this corner and everyone else is in a different part of the office, as long as those Haredi men are working and contributing to the economy, then we have to find a way for that to happen. They need to be able to join the defense forces. They're 20% of the population. They need to be able to contribute. And yes, the Haredim need to be able to allow the non-Orthodox spaces. We got so close before politics changed to having Robinson's Arch, sort of, we call it the egalitarian part of the Kotel, integrated into the entire Kotel Plaza. It was going to be open 24/7 like the other part of the Kotel, and guarded, and all the things that are part of sort of this Kotel Plaza, this national place of gathering. But it didn't happen because the coalition went and upgraded. And so we have to continue to use our political might to find a way for the Orthodox, the ultra-Orthodox, the non-Orthodox, and would say the non-observant. I like to use the word secular because they are certainly Jews. The messiness is obviously in the details. I don't have that. But I'll just end by connecting to the Parsha. We had the census. It said that there were 601,000 Jewish fighting men in the time of the wilderness. There are about, it's hard to sort of throw numbers, between 16 and 20 million Jews in the world, 9 million in Israel alone. A tiny, tiny minority. The state of New York is 20 million people. There were fewer Jews than the state of New York. And so we are going to disagree, and disagree vehemently, hopefully peacefully, but we cannot be disunited. We need to live together and find a way to have Am Yisrael Chai, the nation of Israel Chai, and Medinat Yisrael to continue to thrive into 2048, its 100th birthday and beyond. Shabbat Shalom.